Welcome Life Science learners to another lesson. Trust that you guys are well and excited for our lesson today. In our lesson today, we're going to be focusing on revising genetics. It's an important section. There's lots of application of terms. There are problems that we need to solve. It's important that when trying to work on a section on genetics that we understand the terms. So as we get into the lesson, I'm going to spend some time looking at the important terms, give you an overview of the terms, and then try and see how we could use those terms to read through genetic problems and apply our understanding around solving these genetic problems. So whip out those books, grab a pen, and let's get busy. So as I mentioned, let's look at some core concepts and terms, and then we will look at some patterns of inheritance where we will discuss the difference between complete, incomplete, and codominance. So as we look at the terms, it's important that you make note of these terms. The concept of what is a locus. Again guys, if we draw a chromosome or a chromatid, we know that often genes are indicated by colored areas or patterns on a chromosome. That specific position of a gene on a chromosome is referred to as its locus. So it comes from the word location. The next concept is alleles, and guys, remember that genes control the expression of characteristics, and these genes are inherited from the sperm and the egg, or we say from the mother and the father. So we get a set of two genes from both the parents. We know that these genes come in various different combinations when they inherited. So the possible alternative forms of these genes are referred to as alleles. So alleles can be represented for the height in plants, which you guys are familiar with when we looked at Mendel's experiment. These are the three possible alleles that we have. So we have these three illustrations as different types of alleles for a specific characteristic. The next term is homozygous. The word homozygous can be broken up into homo and zygous, meaning zygote. So this is an offspring that is produced by inheriting the same gene from both the parents. So for example, if we look at the characteristic of height, that is a homozygous allele, which means that this individual has inherited the same allele from both the parents, making this zygote a homozygous zygote. The term heterozygous refers to an individual having different. The word hetero refers to different. So essentially, this individual inherits contrasting genes from the parent for that specific characteristic. The next concept is dominant, and we will chat about the term recessive as well. So guys, it's important that we understand that the term dominant was coined when Mendel carried out his experiment. And when he did his experiment, he looked at separating out characteristics and then crossing them. And what he noticed that sometimes in a cross, he noticed that when a characteristic crossed with another plant produced one characteristic in the offspring, he referred to that as being a dominant trait, a trait that prevents the recessive trait from expressing itself. So that means we've got to understand what the word recessive means. And essentially the word recessive points to a trait or characteristic that is expressed only in the absence of the dominant trait. So when the dominant trait is not present, example in a homozygous combination, we refer to that being the recessive trait expressed in the absence of the dominant trait. Again, the word homozygous dominant would refer to an allele that has, again, the same allele present from both the sperm and the egg. The word heterozygous allele points to a zygote that has got contrasting alleles for the same characteristic. So that would be a different allele from each parent, i.e. sperm or egg, that come together. And finally, the term homozygous recessive would again point to an individual that is recessive and having the same gene, the word homo meaning having the same gene inherited from the both parents. Homo, same, zygote, again, same alleles from the parent. Okay, we quickly wrap this section up with a few more terms such as genotype and phenotype. Again, this points to The genotype is the genetic makeup, which is often expressed using alleles. So when we illustrate these, we refer to these as the genotype of the individual. Phenotype is a description of the physical appearance of an individual. So when we talk about the plant being tall or an individual being right-handed, we refer to that as being a description of the physical appearance of a characteristic. Guys, you would also remember that when we study genetic crosses, a cross can be done for a single characteristic, so we call that a monohybrid cross, or we could study how two characteristics, di meaning two, are inherited at the same time. So these we will discuss again in our lesson. We do know that in a genetic cross, when parents are crossed, we know that they produce an F1 generation, and the F1 generation points to the offsprings produced in a cross. So the filial generation would be the offsprings produced when parents are crossed. And finally, the concept of a Punnett square, again, is a systematic tool that we use to find out what are the possibilities when we cross individuals. So again, it's an important tool that you use in a genetic diagram to illustrate the possibilities of offsprings that are created. Guys, we're going to look at the concept of complete dominance in our lesson, where one characteristic prevents another characteristic coded for by that gene from expressing itself. So that's one pattern of inheritance. The other pattern of inheritance we refer to as co-dominance. Again, this is an example where a type of dominance where both alleles are expressed fully. An example of this are human blood groups, where you have A blood group, B blood group coming together and being represented as an AB. So it's a combination of both. So it's a co-dominance pattern of inheritance. And finally, the third pattern of inheritance that you need to remember is incomplete dominance. So this essentially is when the dominant gene allele is not able to completely dominate over the recessive gene allele. So this results in a mix of the two genes, which creates what we call a new phenotype. So the example that we often refer to is in certain species of plants, when a plant that is homozygous red is crossed with a plant that is homozygous white, they produce an offspring that is pink. And pink means now we have an incomplete dominance of red over white, which results in a new phenotype. So remember that in incomplete dominance, you end up with a new phenotype in the offspring. Guys, we've looked at the important terms. We've had an overview of the different patterns of inheritance. I trust that you guys have recollected those important terms. Let's go into a break, and when we get back, we're going to apply some of these terms into problem solving. So have a short break, and I'll see you in a bit.